This segment brought to you by Kansas Wheat. Learn more at rediscoverwheat.org.
So just kind of transitioning a little bit over to this whole greenhouse gas idea. Again, just putting this up here because this is definitely something that if you follow this topic, you're going to hear a lot about, right? Again, this is kind of the favorite topic that we get kind of covered on when it comes to a sustainability standpoint. So what about these gassy cows, right? This whole idea of enteric fermentation. Just a few things, again, kind of preaching to the choir here, but the one thing I always say to any audience, it's always like, just if you hear somebody saying cow farts, just please correct them that it doesn't come out the back end, right? It comes out the front end of the animal, right? It's more properly cow burps, or eructation is the technical term for the process of what happens. Of course, cattle, sheep, goats, they have a large fermentation vat as their stomach, right? Their first stomach compartment, the rumen. It's just teeming with trillions of microorganisms, and those microbes are going to produce a lot of gas. They produce a lot of CO2. Some of them produce methane gas, right? That's going to collect in the animal's headspace. Ideally, at least once a minute, there's going to be some contractions that are going to remove that gas, right? So that's a natural process, natural part of their ability to take this human inedible material, right? It's a trade-off of this process. The other thing that's key to know and remember is that essentially it's kind of counter to what a lot of news media articles would suggest, that as animals eat more high fiber diets, they make more methane, right? So when cattle are out grazing or when they're eating hay, they're going to be making more methane as compared to animals that are going to be in a feedlot situation, a finishing situation, eating a grain-based diet. So the more fermentable starch that is in an animal's diet, the more concentrate, the lower the methane emissions. And that's actually one of the most consistent ways that we know how to lower methane emissions is feeding more concentrate to ruminant animals. But there we have this trade-off, right, where we're using more human inedible stuff, or human edible stuff potentially, right, to lower methane emissions. So there is no free lunch in any of this when it comes to all these different issues that we sometimes get criticized for in the beef industry. What's also important is to kind of step back and look at the bigger picture, right? In terms of, we hear all this about greenhouse gas emissions from cattle. How big of a source are they really in the United States, okay? So this information comes from the U.S. EPA's greenhouse gas emission inventory. So these are the direct emissions that come from cattle. So this is emissions of the methane that we just talked about and any emissions that come from their manure, okay? So about 2% of greenhouse gas emissions directly come from cattle, beef cattle in the United States. Landfills are roughly equivalent, okay, in terms of all the gases that come from them. Transportation, about 25%, 26% changes year to year. Electricity is close to 30%, and all the other sources add up there too. So just to give you also a frame of reference, all of agriculture in the United States is about 9% of emissions, okay? So again, it's far less than transportation, far less than all these other things that we do to burn fossil fuels, non-essential things essentially that we're doing, right? Our essential things that we're doing of producing food for people are about 9% of emissions. What's also important is that things aren't static, right? Emissions have gone down over time in the U.S. beef cattle industry, and really that's been driven by productivity. So there's lots of different numbers here on the screen, but this is just giving you an idea of comparing when we had our largest cattle herd in the United States in 1975 in terms of total beef and dairy cattle compared to 2016, right? So there's a few different things that are on the screen here. The first up top is essentially emission intensity, right? So how many greenhouse gas emissions get produced per unit of beef? And you can see that that's gone down 33%. Second is just the total amount of direct emissions coming from the industry, and this is all information from the UNFAO, the Food and Agriculture Organization. So those have gone down 31%. Total beef production is roughly the same though, right? So we're producing the same amount of beef with over a third fewer animals, right? And that's really what's driven down those emissions. And I just threw in, just for fun, right, the number of people in the United States has gone up over 100 million people, right, in those 40 years. So that is something that's a big change and obviously driving a lot of things as well. And even when we zoom out beyond just beef cattle, right, this is a success story of American agriculture, American animal agriculture, right? So again, this is information from the UNFAO, but just looking at from 1961 to 2016, the total greenhouse gas emissions, these aren't greenhouse gas emissions per unit of product, but total emissions have gone down 12%, right? 12% decline, and yet we produce 89% more meat, milk, and eggs in America, right? So that's super impressive. And again, these are these kind of facts that we definitely do need to share with people. And this is not stuff that we come up with, right? Again, this is publicly available data from the UN, from the FAO. So great success story in terms of reducing total emissions, which definitely has not happened in sectors like transportation, for example, right? Those emissions just keep going up.
Sure Crop Fertilizers was started by my father, Don Sherman, and my mother, Shirley Sherman. Family business that started in the 80s. We predominantly focus on plant nutrients and what we can do to give growers better responses with the fertilizer dollars that they do, and what we can do to make those things work better for the grower. We're based out of Seneca, Kansas. We work with growers in their soil analysis to figure out what they need, and then we can put those in a blend that gives them the best results, and so that we can deliver that direct to their farm so that they have those nutrients where they need them, when they need them, and so that they can apply them in a manner that's very efficient to them and works well in their planting systems and what they're doing. Sure Crop Fertilizers has been around for a long time. We always say we're big enough to take care of everything you need, but we're small enough to do it quickly. You can get a hold of us at 1-800-635-4743. Our website is surecropfertilizers.com, and you can always email me at Corey@surecropfertilizers.com, and with any questions you have, and we're glad to answer it and work with you.